guys, this is Lauren from Lauren Watkins Art, and today I'm going to be demonstrating how to paint a sunset using soft pastels. I started off by taking a pastel pencil, or you could use a new pastel. I just suggest using a harder pastel, and I started drawing off the basic shapes I saw. I started with the horizon line. I used a ruler to help me make sure it was nice and straight. And then I took the pencil and I started blocking in the basic shapes. Now I've grabbed a couple other colors, and that's just kind of to help me differentiate the different shapes I saw as I started blocking them in. Now I'm taking a stiff paintbrush that's an old one that I don't care about much, and I am dipping it in rubbing alcohol to blend out the drawing that I did. Now the reason why I blend it out with rubbing alcohol is one, to smooth it out and to kind of create an underpainting for me to go off of, and the other reason is it helps the rubbing alcohol really gets that pastel deep into the tooth of the paper, and so I don't get too much pastel buildup as I am working. And I am working on 400 grit UArt sanded paper. This is my favorite paper to work on currently. It's a great texture. It's not too fine and it's not too coarse, and I can get a lot of layers on, but I can still get quite a bit of detail. Now I'm starting to paint in the tree line using acrylic ink. This is the Bombay India ink from Dr. P.H. Martin's, but you can use any other kind of waterproof ink here. And the reason why I do this is because it helps me get my darks in my picture dark enough. So any pastel picture that I do, I typically ink up all of my shadow, my dark shadow areas. And it helps me as I'm working not to lose my space, because I have these dark areas guiding me as I paint, and it also helps me to get the darks dark enough. Sometimes pastels, it's hard to get dark enough of a color, and so having this underpainting that's so dark helps ease that process. And if any of the pastel kind of flakes off, you're not going to be left with little white parts showing through, if that makes sense. And so that's why I do that. And now I am taking pan pastels and I am blending out the bottom layers of the sky. I'm doing big swatches of color, just getting the basic shapes in. Now this is my first time working with pan pastels in about a year. If you don't know what pan pastels are, they look like circle, like makeup. Like if you got like a circle thing of blush, they look kind of like that, but they come in all different colors. And they're made out of an ultra fine pastel powder, and instead of drawing it directly on paper like you do with a pastel, you use different applicators to apply it. So on the sky, I'm using a big sponge applicator. I don't even know how to describe the shape, but it's kind of a squarish one that is angled on the edges to apply these basic layers of the clouds in. And it's a really fast way to get your colors down when you're working with pastels. But it's also really nice because the pan pastels apply so thinly, because it's such a fine powder that they use, that you're, again, not building up too much pigment too quickly. If you don't know why that's an issue, it's because if you fill in the tooth of your paper by depositing too much of your pastel down, then you can't do more layers over the top. It's also why when you are working with pastels, you typically work with your harder pastels like a pastel pencil or new pastels. The Rembrandts are pretty hard, and you work with those ones first, and then you gradually add your softer pastels to the top. Your softer pastels are like your Sennelier pastels or your Schmincke ones. So that's why I'm using my pan pastels for this picture. It also helps because this scene is the sky is so complex in this, that it's really nice to be able to utilize the different foam applicators and tools that come with it to get those to get that variety of shape and lay down, and also that translucency. Because clouds can tend to have a translucent appearance. Sorry, I forgot to speak English today, and it really helps add that dimension to the clouds. And so even when I'm not using the pan pastels, I will still be using the tools because they can help aid in getting the different effects I need today. I hope that makes sense. I might be getting rambly. This is also my first time recording a video at my stand-up easel, and so I'm sorry if I'm in the way a lot as I work. I'm still getting used to trying to figure out how to record at an easel without blocking too much view. Especially because I tend to move a lot when I work at the easel. I have my music blaring and I'm singing and dancing as I paint. That's kind of my process. And so you guys are getting the more toned down version since I knew I was recording it. But just think of like Star-Lord at the beginning of Guardians of the Galaxy as he's going to get the Infinity Stone. That is me when I'm painting. But anyways, back to the subject at hand. I've been working on the sky more, and I left a big white area for the sun. In my picture, my reference photo, the sun is really white. That's the main focal point of the entire picture. And so I wanted to keep all my highlights darker than that. So I didn't use pure white on any other sections other than the sun and the areas immediately surrounding it, because I wanted that to be the main focus. I also started blocking in the field underneath where the sun is shining onto. I used, again, pan pastels for that. It was really nice to blend out and get big swatches of color kind of laid down, and I kept it darker in the foreground because I wanted that area to be more in shadow, and then I did the rest of it darker than what it's going to end up being. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted my highlighted blades of grass and the sections to really pop. And if you are having a hard time getting your highlights to stand up, that usually means that the areas around it aren't dark enough. Your midtones and your shadows, your shadowed areas aren't dark enough. And so really amping up that contrast. And it's really important in this picture because that's what makes this picture so powerful, is the high amount of contrast. You've got the bright, bright sun against the dark clouds. You've got the backlit trees that appear like purpley black with the sun shining on this colorful field. And so I made sure to really play that up. Now I'm adding some orange to the yellow section of the sky. In my reference photo, it was just gradients of a pale yellow, but I really wanted to pull in some of those colors found in the field up into the sky, and that's to help tie them together. I didn't want just a blue sky and a reddish brown ground and not have any kind of overlap in color, because then they look like two separate things. But if I can find creative ways to kind of pull some of those colors into each other and into each area, it helps balance it, tie it together, and it helps add interest as you're looking at it. Now I'm spraying it with a workable fixative at this point because I needed some areas to be a little bit darker than I was making them, and I was also some of the areas were starting to pick up the color as I was laying it down, and it wasn't depositing enough. And so I sprayed it with a workable fixative to help adhere it, and then I let it dry completely, and then I came back to work. And that allowed me to do quite a few more layers. Now I'm just darkening up the foreground, and I'm working on the tree line. I'm pulling the oranges in and just kind of bringing them that orange down enough that I'm not going to get kind of a halo around the trees and a gap between the sky and the tree line. Now I'm back up in the clouds, adding highlights and shadows. I found with doing these clouds, this is the most complex sky I've ever done, but I found with clouds, it's best to work in layers and not rush it, at least for me. They are so complex. They look like they would be simple, but they're really quite complex. And so adding layers and shadows and highlights and building it up and adding variants of the colors you might see. It may look gray, by adding like a purple gray and a blue gray. And for the highlights, instead of it being white, adding a little bit of a really pale yellow and a really pale pink really help to add interest and dimension to the clouds. And so take your time when you're working on it and add lots of layers. Now I've added some more to the foreground and I sprayed it down so I'd get a nice area that wouldn't blend too much as I did the next layer. And now I'm really focusing on getting those highlights in. I'm really looking at my reference photo on my computer, and that's why you keep seeing my head turn left. That's where my reference photo is. And so I'm continually looking at that and looking at where things are and looking at the shape of it. With clouds, they are so organic in shape. There's no clouds that look the same as another. And so it's really important to actually look at what you're drawing if you want it to be realistic and not cartoonish. And so I'm really looking at it, looking at the shape, looking at its location and relevance to how the other things are around it so that I can really play that up. Now I've made sure to add some of the blue from the sky into little gaps in the clouds, and this is to help those clouds not look like a solid mass. I don't want it to look like a storm coming in. I don't want it to be like this big gray wall that's up in the sky. I want it to look like fluffy clouds that are moving along. And so I'm making sure to have little bits of the sky poke through it. Now you can see I added some of that purple that I mentioned earlier into those clouds to help add dimension and to tie it into the foreground of the picture. Sorry about that. I'm just struggling enunciating today. But now I'm starting to add some of the grass in. And I'm starting in the part that would look further away, and I'm building downward. And this really helps build those layers so that you look like you're building depth and distance, because it's really hard to work around small details. And so if I start with the part that's going to be furthest away and then I add my layers going from there forward, or on a picture from there down, I can layer things without covering up what I did before. And I can have bits of it poking through like it would be in real life without having to draw around something I already drew. Now I'm also looking at this and trying to make sure I keep my tree line from being too uniform or symmetrical. I don't want my trees to be too much the same. I don't want their height to be the same or the shape to be identical. So I'm trying to keep it as random as I can so that it looks more realistic. If your trees are evenly spaced when you draw them, it's not going to look like a real thing. That's something that naturally occurred. Now I'm taking blue in and I'm adding some blue and over there orange to those trees to help it look like there's gaps in the trees. To help get your trees more realistic, you need to have a little bit of what would be in the background behind them poking through the gaps of the leaves and branches. Trees aren't like a wall, and so you're gonna see some of the stuff that's behind them. And so if you can make sure you include that, you're going to get a more realistic effect as you work. Now, as you see me working on the field, you can see me adding blues and all different kinds of colors into this. I want it to have a lot of dimension and depth, and I also want it to pull in those sky colors like I mentioned before. So I'm just layering it up, and then you'll see me take different sponge tools to blend them out a little bit, and then I do some more layers, and then I spray it so that they stay and they don't blend with the layers I do on top. And again, just more refining. I'm really looking at my colors and my values and going from there. At one point, I turned my picture black. I turned my reference photo black and white, and I took a photo of the picture as I worked on it. And that was to make sure I was getting my values correct. I didn't want things to be too much the same or the clouds to be too dark. And so looking at it black and white and looking at my reference photo black and white, I could kind of gauge what sections needed to be reworked. Especially the section around the sun, so much of it is whited out by that brightness and there's so many colors going on there that I couldn't really separate what was sky and what was cloud because there wasn't as much contrast as like the upper section of the sky. So turning it black and white really really allowed me to see the differences in what was going on there and add it to my picture. So just more spraying, and then I let it dry and come back and work. And this is quite a process, and I'm taking my time, but it's also, pastels for me is also a pretty fast medium. This picture took me, I think I had 6 or 7 hours of video footage, and so that's why I'm moving pretty fast, because I had to condense it down quite a bit as I worked. But take your time, layer it, take a break, walk away for a little bit, and then come back and work on it. And when you take those breaks, you can see what needs to be worked on. Now, this is the second day I worked on it. I did about 2/3 of it the first day, and then I woke up really early the following day to finish it up before my kids woke up. And so if I'm looking a little rough in this part of the video, it's because it's 4 o'clock in the morning and I am painting away. So I kind of rolled out of bed and brushed my teeth, put on my glasses, and came downstairs to work for a little bit. Now I'm just still adding more layers to that grass, but I'm also trying to avoid making it too up and down, trying to avoid too many up and down strokes, especially in the distance, because I want them to recede visually. And if the grass stands up and is too spiky, that's supposed to be further away, it's not going to look as far. The farther away things are, the less detail you see. So you don't really see the grass, the individual blades of grass when it's really far away. It's more smooth. And so I try to keep those blades of grass that are further away more horizontal in my strokes. I may dash them a little bit, but just like doing tiny dots and dashes as I'm drawing it, but I try not to do vertical strokes. And here I am. I'm almost done with this. This picture was really fun to do. I used, aside from my pan pastels, I used Terry Ludwig soft pastels, and I also used my Mount Vision pastels and a few new pastels and my pastel pencils. And I just kind of used them for what they were needed for. I saved my Terry Ludwig ones for the top layers because those ones are my softer pastels. and so I could get lots of those layers on the very top. Now here I am signing it, and here is the finished piece. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and if you would like to see more of my artwork, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye!